Hello and welcome to the Kushner Halftime Show. I hope you enjoyed the first half. I know that I did. So I was thinking this year I wanted to talk about something related to football and halacha and Torah. And I have my football. And then I was thinking, I got my pump, just in case the football gets deflated, if you know what I mean. And it reminded me of a pasuk in Parshat Kedoshim. The pasuk says, Lo tasu ovel b'mishpat. You shouldn't do something inappropriate, injustice, b'mida, with a measurement, b'mishkal. Mishkal is a weight, u'b'mesura, or with a liquid measurement. The pasuk continues, Moznei tzedek, avnei tzedek, efat tzedek, v'hin tzedek yelachem. You know, in the olden days, everything you bought, you would go to the market, and you would buy things, and they had a scale, and you would put all your food on one side of the scale, and in order to measure the food, on the other side of the scale, they would have, let's say, a rock that was measured at 1 pound. So they would have the 1 pound rock and the 2 pound rock, and they would put it on the scale. And once it balanced out, you knew that you had 1 pound of food. And that was how they measured things. The Torah says you have to keep righteous measures. Moznei tzedek. The scales have to be accurate. Sometimes the scale gets old, it starts to break, it doesn't work so well. You have to make sure that that rock, or that whatever that weight is, that it's correct, that it's 1 pound. If it starts to crack or something or something chips off or loses a little bit of the weight, then you also have a problem, you have to fix it. And then the pasuk ends off, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God, Asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. That took you out of the land of Egypt. So let's analyze Deflategate from the perspective of the Torah. There's a Gemara, the Gemara in Masechet Bava Metzia. The Gemara also appears in Masechet Bava Batra. Tanu Rabbanan, Lo tasu avel b'mishpat, b'mida, b'mishkal, u'b'mesura. You shouldn't act inappropriately in judgment with mida, mishkal, and mesura, these different types of measurements. And the Gemara says, the Gemara gives a couple examples. What does it mean you're going to measure inappropriately? The Gemara says, they used to, if they wanted to divide a property, let's say a wealthy man passed away, and his sons were going to divide his property. So they had to measure the length of the property so that everybody gets an even share. They had these ropes that were measured at a certain amount. Now, in the summer and the winter, because the rope can contract and expand just a little bit, the Gemara says it's inappropriate if you would measure for one brother in the winter and then for another brother in the summer, because the scale is going to be ever so slightly off. The Gemara gives another example. If you take your measurements and you soak them in salt, it gives a little bit of added weight, very minute, but still inappropriate. So says the Gemara, even when the weight seems to be almost exact, if it's not exact, you can't use it. That's the Gemara. Now the Rambam quotes this Gemara, La Halacha. The Rambam in Hilchot Geneva, the laws of theft, the 7th parak says, Hashokel lechavero b'mishkolot chaserot min hamishkol. If you measure for your friend with a measurement that's lacking, okay? Says the Rambam, Harezu over below taseh. You have violated a Torah prohibition, a negative commandment. Okay. But those are for people who own businesses and who deal with weights. This could still be relevant if you go to a kosher butcher shop. A lot of times the meat that you buy is weighted. So in the bag, they take the piece of chicken or they take the piece of meat and they put it on a scale. Usually it's an electronic scale. This could be a problem if the scale was faulty, if the scale was broken. But then the Rambam says, takes it even a step further. The Rambam says not only can you not use it in business, but in Halacha Gimel, Rambam says, Kol mi shemashe bebeito o bechanuto. Even to leave it in your house or in your store, mida chasera o mishkal chaser. You have a measurement that's lacking, that's missing something, over below taseh. Says the Rambam, "Va'afilu lasod hamida avit shamemi raglayim aser." Now let's say it's an old broken scale and you decide to use it not to measure things. You decide to use it for some other purpose. The Rambam says that's also forbidden. Even if you're not using it for the purpose of measuring things, it's still forbidden. Now the Rambam said not only is it forbidden in the store, it's also forbidden at home. There's a discussion among the later authorities as to what the Rambam meant. When the Rambam says that not only can you not leave this in your house, but even if you're going to use it for some other purpose, it's still forbidden. When it's forbidden at home, let's say you have something at home that's no longer usable as a scale, can you keep it in your house and change its purpose? Can you use it for something else? Let's say you had a scale that was sort of like a bowl. Can you use the bowl to store things? Can you put something else in it? Not to measure it, but just to store. So the Rambam said that was asur, that was forbidden. There's a machloket whether the Rambam meant that was forbidden min haTorah, from the Torah, or mid'Rabbanan. The Minchas Chinuch says that when the Rambam says this, he only meant it that it was asur mid'Rabbanan, because after all, you're not using it to measure, and even you're certainly not using it to sell. But even if you weren't using it to sell, you're not using it to measure, and therefore the Minchas Chinuch says, and he quotes from other sources as well, that the Minchas Chinuch believes that the Rambam only meant it mid'Rabbanan. However, the Even Ha'azal, which was written by Reb Isser Zalman Meltzer, suggests that the Rambam meant that it was d'oraita. Actually, the Even Ha'azal quotes from a different source in the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvot. You see, the Rambam wrote different books. One of perhaps his most famous book is called Yad HaChazaka, or Mishnah Torah, which is his halacha sefer. But he also wrote something called Sefer HaMitzvot. Sefer HaMitzvot was just a list of the Taryag Mitzvot, and in there the Rambam mentions this. So Even Ha'azal suggests that the Rambam was of the opinion that this is in fact the Oraita. This is a Torah prohibition. Okay, now either way, whether it's rabbinically forbidden or forbidden min haTorah, it's forbidden. But the question is, where does that come up? Where would that matter? So, in Tafshin Memhei, about 1985, there was a questioner who had what's called a gemach. Gemach is Gimel Mem Chet. It stands for Gemilah Chasadim. It's a organization that helps people, that does chesed. And this gemach had a lot of toys, and he used to give the toys to children who didn't have their own toys. And he had a scale that was broken, and he wanted to know, is his broken scale allowed to be used to play with for the baby? Now, it seems from the Rambam that perhaps this might be forbidden. So he sent this question to some of the leading poskim of the generation. I found two places where this question was asked, and he was the one who asked the question, so it was the same question. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, in Minchat Shlomo, Rav Shlomo Zalman suggests that in this case it would be permitted to use. Why? Because he says, the prohibition of leaving something for another purpose is only rabbinically forbidden. Okay? And he also says that it has to be the type of scale that could potentially be used in a store, even though it's not currently being used. But this type of scale, which looks like a toy, it would never have been used anyway, so it doesn't even count as a scale. As such, says Rav Shlomo Zalman, this type of toy, and Rav Shlomo Zalman says the same thing about a baby bottle, which has inaccurate measurements on it. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman, this can be used. Now, as we mentioned before, there was actually a machloket whether whether according to Rambam this was rabbinically prohibited or prohibited min ha-Torah. Rav Shlomo Zalman seems to assume the opinion that it's only rabbinically prohibited. According to the opinion that it was prohibited min ha-Torah, perhaps Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's leniency wouldn't apply. The other answer given, the other tshuva which was written actually a few months after Rav Shlomo Zalman's tshuva, was written by the Minchat Yitzchak. The Minchat Yitzchak was Dayan Yitzchak Weiss, who was the head of the Badatz in Yerushalayim. And he has an interesting suggestion. He says, it's unclear whether we could really rely on the leniency and whether we could really just assume that it's totally permitted. After all, the Rambam was very clear that even if you're not using it for any purpose of sale, it's still forbidden. So according to the Rambam, even to leave it in your house for nothing is prohibited. So to use it and to play with it, Dayan Weiss was not comfortable saying that it is permitted. But what he did say is, you have a very easy way out. Just put a sign. Put a little label on the scale. Put a little label on the scale. And this way, when somebody sees the scale, they know that the scale is inaccurate. And once you have a sign on the scale, says Dayan Weiss, then you could definitely play with that toy. And now we come back to Tom Brady. Now, perhaps the way that the Torah would view Deflategate, the football is supposed to weigh a certain amount. It's supposed to weigh, I don't know what the numbers are, but when the football is deflated, it's not an accurate measurement. It would seem, according to the Torah, according to the Rambam, this is all in jest, that if your football was deflated, maybe you shouldn't keep it at home. But perhaps like Rav Shlomo Zalman, we can be lenient, and we can allow you to keep a deflated football in your house. I don't know if we should use it in a game, and maybe according to the Minchas Yitzchak, maybe Tom Brady should have just put a big sign on every football, deflated. I don't know if that would have gone over so well with the referees. Be that as it may, that's Deflategate, and that's the halacha of Midah, Mishkal, U'Mesura. But the truth is, there's a very valuable lesson we can learn for ourselves. Even if we don't have deflated footballs, even if we don't have broken scales in our home, and perhaps this halacha doesn't relate so much to us. The Sefer HaChinuch goes through all of the mitzvot in the Torah, and for every mitzvah he gives a reason. He tries to explain, why did Hashem give us this mitzvah? What lesson can we learn? When it comes to this mitzvah, the Sefer HaChinuch doesn't even bother. Says the Sefer HaChinuch, Shoresh mitzvahs hayosher v'harchokas hagezel v'hatarmis. When it comes to the acting appropriately and dealing biyashrut and not stealing, mibein b'nei adam yadua l'chol bardas. Every thinking person knows why this is inappropriate. He doesn't even say a reason. It doesn't need a reason. The Gemara tells us that when we get to Shamayim, there are 6 questions that we're going to be asked. The first question, Nasata v'nasata be'amuna. Were you honest in your business dealings? The very first question when you get to Shamayim, were you honest in business? There's 2 ways to understand it. The simple understanding, did you deal honestly? Did you cheat? Or were you honest? But the Mefarshim give a different way of explaining. You see, Emunah, we know, refers to faith in Hashem. Nasata v'nasata be'emunah means, when you did business, did you have Emunah in Hashem? Did you realize that whether or not this business deal is going to be successful, whether you're going to make a lot of money or a little money, that's up to Hashem. That's Hashem's decision. If you realize that Hashem runs the world, and that Hashem decides whether you're successful or not, so there's no reason to cheat in business. There's no reason to tip the scale one way or another. The Nitziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, in his Perush on Chumash, on this pasuk, he explains why at the beginning we mentioned that when the Torah says that you should have measurements that are even, you should make sure that they're correct. The pasuk ends off, Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. I'm Hashem who took you out of Egypt. So the Nitziv asks, the beginning of the pasuk is talking about scales and business. What does that have to do with taking us out of Mitzrayim? Says the Nitziv, the purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim was to teach us that Hashem runs the world. When you deflate your football, when you take your scale, when you take your rock and you soak it in salt, like the Gemara says, to make it weigh a little bit more, so that you get a little bit extra, you make a little bit more, what are you saying? You're saying, I don't believe that Hashem really decides what I get. I don't believe fully that Hashem runs the world. Maybe I could get a little bit extra. Says the Nitziv, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Deal honestly with your scales, because I'm Hashem. Because I make those decisions. If you have emunah in Hashem, then you have nothing to worry about. Let the scale work fine. That's the lesson of the scale. It's something that we can all learn from. Whether or not your football was deflated, we can learn the lesson that Hashem runs the world. Just a few sign-off announcements. Obviously, I have to give my prediction. I have it written down here. I'm going to go against everything I believe in. As a Jets fan, it's very difficult for me to go with the Patriots. But as sad as it is, I feel the Patriots, I think they're going to win. And I think it's going to be 27-21. Okay, we'll see. Just a reminder, if you had buffalo wings, don't forget to make a bori nefasho. And if you had a hero, don't forget to bench. And I hope you enjoy the second half.
And thanks, Rabbi Sukenik. This year was much better than Katy Perry. Next year you should sing at the halftime show. Here we go. Pats 23-17. And here's my deflated ball to show that we're going to go all the way.